As anyone who works around death and with the dying will tell you, there are some people who, in their time of dying, become exalted beings. Their presence, grace, and wisdom magnify, extend well beyond the bounds of their bodies as their spirit starts to come loose from its physical confines. And this touches everyone around them in the deepest of ways. My friend Cari was such a person. She died 6 days after we recorded this interview, and I am beyond honored and so grateful that she and her husband, Richard, were willing to have this conversation with me. This will touch you to your core, and if any part of you is considering turning this off right now, finding something lighter to listen to, I encourage you to stop, to tamp that impulse down. You probably need to hear this. We all need to be having conversations like this, and it will serve you, if not now, at some point in the future, to have heard the words of a person on their deathbed. Cari and Richard and I met in 2013 through a shared interest in home funerals. And it was through meeting Cari that I ended up co-founding an organization here where I live in the Nevada City, Grass Valley area of Northern California called the Full Circle Living and Dying Collective. If you're interested in just knowing more about how to support people at the end of their lives, more about home funerals, all sorts of things related to reclaiming the ancient human way of death, I encourage you to Google that and look up this group, Full Circle Living and Dying Collective. Cari gave us the idea for the name, and I'm no longer a part of it. I stepped away a couple years ago to focus on mothering and my business, but the women I started it with are still out there doing it, and it's really amazing. So Cari was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor in December of 2011, vestibular schwannoma, very large cystic mass on the vestibular nerve just after it exited the brainstem, and she had surgery to remove this tumor in November of 2014. So I met her and Richard and knew them and was working with them. We hosted some death cafes here in this area and taught some classes on home funerals. This was all in between her diagnosis and the brain surgery. And the surgery ended up damaging the facial nerve and paralyzing the right side of her face. Also resulted in the loss of her right side balance, proprioception, movement coordination, and hearing. In January of 2015, she had a second brain surgery. And the next month, she and Richard moved down to Morro Bay, which is next to San Luis Obispo on California's central coast. And then a few months ago, in September of 2017, Cari received an advanced cancer diagnosis. The source of the cancer was undetermined because it was so highly advanced already and spread throughout the body. She had tumors throughout her lymph nodes, which resulted in advanced edema or water swelling in her legs and arms, abdominal cavity, and all the organ sacs, heart, lungs, liver, intestines, etc., and had advanced fibrous tumors in both breasts. So this is what she was dealing with here at the end. I tell you all that so you just have a clear picture of what was happening in the physical body as her mental, spiritual, emotional bodies became so refined and clear. And the fact that she was able to balance the two is just beautiful. So she was determined terminal. She didn't want to pursue any sort of treatment and put on hospice care. In this conversation, Richard, Cari, and I talk about dying out loud and creating a living funeral, how grief and love are not different emotions, and the depth of love equals the depth of grief. We talk about home funerals and the ecstasy, healing, and community that they bring, and alternative options for body disposal, such as deep sea burial, alkaline hydrolysis, and green burial. We also talk about casket art. And we talk about bringing together the love and life and grief and pain and agony of death and how that is the intersection where healing happens. I really appreciate the part of the conversation where we talk about mushrooms and microbes as honored elders, and Cari's experienced microdosing on psilocybin during the dying process, and how mushrooms teach us to lead with soul consciousness, show us how to die, and greatly reduce fear in terminal patients. Richard also speaks about what it's like to watch your beloved life partner die and the complexity of feeling the reverence watching Cari go through this, but also just having his heart bleed out as he watches his partner leave, and why he has no intention of getting over his grief. And in the end, I asked Cari if she's scared because she seems so not scared, and I loved her answer. After the episode, I will talk about what happened after Cari passed, how the concept of how we die like we lived. And I'll talk a little bit more about microdosing too for anyone who is unfamiliar with that concept. But for now, I'm Amber Hill. This is the Medicine Stories podcast. I'm super grateful you're here to listen to this episode. And let's hear from Richard and Cari. Okay, hi Cari, hi Richard. Thank you. I'm just honored that you have both agreed to speak with me this morning. It feels very, very holy to be welcomed into your space right now. So, Cari, I'll probably address most of these questions to Cari, but Richard, feel free to jump in anytime. I know you guys are really a unit, and having observed you taking care of Cari through her brain tumor over the last few years is just such a beautiful devotion and partnership between the two of you. And I'm really glad that you're here too, Richard. So, Cari, you have been, to use your phrase, dying out loud on Facebook over the last month or so, perhaps, writing beautiful posts brimming with insight and full of love about the dying process and the journey that you're on. And the reaction from your friends and family has just been so heartening. And I see you really bringing healing to the people who are witnessing your journey. And I'd like to get to the heart of who you are and what has led you to this moment when so many people approach their own death with dread and terror. What experiences in your life have prepared you to embrace death with such an open heart and attitude of reverent curiosity?
The first death I experienced awoke in me that which you so eloquently described. And that was the death of my father. He was given a terminal diagnosis, and that immediately aroused in me a wonder. And so what I did is I turned to him with my questions. And my open, honest, authentic questioning evoked in my brother terror. There's just two siblings, he and I. So one of my dad's children did not want to look at it, talk about it, acknowledge it, deal with it. One of them wanted to see it, understand it, grow with it, know what it is that it was bringing into our lives. And I observed my father in total conflict with these two polar opposite ways of handling such a significant event. To me, it looked like an intersection of love and fear.
Mm.
And how it unfolded initially was fear was the stronger, more scary, more violent force. So it won out, so to speak. Which to me is interesting because I see that in so many ways in our society and our culture. So in the face of that, I just walked away. I didn't want to fight or push, or I just accepted that if I wanted peace, I would just take my love home and have quiet peace there.
Mm.
My dad lived in LA, I lived in Truckee, so I had a long drive home. And he called me shortly after I left, wanting to talk. He wanted love, even in the face of terror. It was as if he knew love was the refuge, which for my dad was really special because he'd lived his life pretty much afraid of love.
Mm.
And death brought out in him an openness to love that I had never seen.
Mm.
So here I was in my 40s, seeing this powerful connection between death and love. And on my drive home, my dad and I, of course, talked about many things. There's many unknown factors to dying. There's a lot to talk about,
Mm.
a lot to wonder about, a lot to explore. And it was so incredible to share wonder with my father, whom that had never occurred with before, really. And death was the catalyst.
Mm. So is that the beginning of the work in the death and dying realm that you started? I presume after that, and through which you and I met?
Yes, I had had no death in my life until then.
It
Just,
makes it makes so much sense to me that your dad would feel your loving and curious energy and want to engage with that. That comes up a lot when you are reading about the dying process, that when the dying person's friends and family shut down or pretend it's not happening, or I've seen members of my family say, "Oh, you'll get better. You're going to pull through." Even when they know they're not, it seems like that's a really isolating experience for the dying person. And that to be met, like you said, in a space of love and awe and wonder is exactly what is needed for that person.
I saw that too, and I was so moved by that realization. I, I couldn't do anything else but pursue that source of love.
Mm. So we met through an interest in home funerals. How did you go from the experience of your father's death to helping people facilitate home funerals and educating people about home funerals?
Well, realized that, like I said, I couldn't unknow what I knew after that. So I began researching death, which is kind of a weird thing to research when you know nothing about it. And the connection of death and love, I think, brought me to home funerals. Because I think because of the healing and the connectivity and the community and all that goes into being with death like that at the time. So this was in the early 2000s, was coming up in my searches pointing to home funerals. I think it's grown and changed a lot now. There's death positivity, so much more is connected to it. But then I was pointed to home funerals.
And why do you think home funerals are important? Why are you having one for yourself?
Because it brings people together in love. It takes fear out of death, or rather than taking fear out of death, it brings love and community and joy and life into death. Brings beauty and a sacred, holy point of view and approach. Can you add, Richard? I'm running out of air.
Yeah. Well, a home funeral, in many ways, is for the living. The soul of the person who's passed is gone from the body. So the home funeral, at least in a fair part, is for the living. So Cari's home funeral, in a lot of ways, is for me and our family and our friends. And Cari knows that. And so my perception is that Cari's desire to have a home funeral is as much for us, is her gift to us to be able to have that reverent, unhurried, self-empowered experience all around love.
I think the self-empowered piece is key to that too. It's the reclaiming of the ancient human way of death.
Mm-hmm.
And it was done that way because it's really the only way that makes sense, is to care for your own dead and to lay them out in a place of honor, a place of reverence, and witness the transition. Death is so hard in our society, and one of the key factors in that is that we have removed it from our daily lives. We've moved it out of the home. We've handed it over into the hands of authority figures who we don't know, who are strangers to us. And we all know from our work in home funerals that people, I think you use this word, there's a sense of ecstasy. I've seen a mother use that word about her son's home funeral. He was 18 and died in a motorcycle accident, that it was an ecstatic experience to have his body laying out in their home for those days and to share his goodbye with their friends and family. And Cari and Richard, I appreciate so much the work that you've done to educate people. We gave a talk together years ago at Sacramento City College in the Psychology of Death and Dying class. And I just remember how well received it was by the college students there and how interested they were in this. And it seems to me that most people are interested in it. They just don't know it exists or don't know it's a possibility. So I just appreciate you both so much for the work that you have done in this realm. Thank you.
Yes, and I just want to add that, again, there's love and life in death, and there's grief and pain and agony in death as well. And to bring that all together is where the healing begins. Mm-hmm. When it gets taken away from us, like you say, there's no healing in that disconnect. Mm-hmm. And there's healing in the connection. Mm-hmm. Healing not just for the sickness that might be creating the death, but healing for the culture. Mm-hmm. Healing for the society and how we are in life. Healing for the planet. It just brings a healing mindset to connect.
Yeah, and speaking of healing for the planet, I think a lot of people think of there being two options for body disposal. And one is cremation, and one is being put underground in a big metal casket. But there are alternate options. And Cari, you have a plan for what will happen to your body after you die. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. I plan to do a full body deep sea burial, which is totally legal. It happens in federal waters 3 miles offshore in deep 600-foot deep waters at least. And it can be green. The Navy does it in a very non-green way right now, but it makes sense to do it green. Mm. And it's the greenest option in California because there's no conservation green burial cemeteries in California right now. Mm. There's hybrid green cemeteries. And so it's alluring to me to give back to the planet at the end. There's also alkaline hydrolysis called aquamation or resomation. Recently was in the California legislature being voted upon. It was approved with amendments, so I'm not sure how the end game is. But it's a very wholesome, ecologically friendly, affordable way to dispose of our dead as well. Mm. So that's in our future. It's accepted in 14 states, soon to be more. And I think much better option than cremation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people don't realize that there's a lot of ecological aftermath to the cremation process.
Right.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about Cari's casket?
Richard, can you do that?
Let's see. Well, Cari is going to be buried in the ocean in a shroud with some sandbags wrapped in the shroud, and we're going to go out in a sailboat, and that's how she's going to be buried. So her casket is really a alternative container is the official word for it. It's a cardboard box. And Cari's mom and her stepdad painted it white. And then Cari and I printed all of the comments from the internet that people had written to her posts, and we printed them and cut them out and pasted them onto her mom and I pasted them onto her casket. So now imagine this large casket shaped cardboard box completely covered in comments from people.
Declarations of love.
Mm-hmm.
And then she took her, Cari is a death doula at Hospice of San Luis Obispo County, and she arranged to have her comment pasted casket taken to Hospice of San Luis Obispo, where it was there for most of a week, and people could come in and decorate the casket and write prayers, messages, drawings on it, or paste whatever they wanted to do, they could do. And so that happened, and then the casket got brought back here, and that's not going to go into the ocean. So at the end of Cari's home funeral, she'll be here in our living room
in that casket,
overlooking the ocean, dressed, ready to be shrouded, and then she'll be in her casket. And once we've completed the shrouding and added the sandbags, then we'll put the lid on the casket the night before. And then in the morning, we'll load her casket into a van and drive it down to Santa Barbara and take it to
Santa Barbara Harbor.
Santa Barbara Harbor, and the casket will then the casket won't go on the boat. That'll be the end of the casket's use, and I'd like to keep the casket.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to add nice about the casket is while it was at Hospice Slow, it brought people together in community and in love. New friendships were made. It was a joyous occasion of people coming together to decorate a casket.
Mm-hmm.
And these were not all people who knew me. The act sparked love and community. And the directors at Hospice were thrilled to, how can you not be thrilled to have joy in your home?
Mm.
They set up a room with the casket in it, with some music that we provided, and just a ton of art supplies, and it looked really fun.
It's another way of a home funeral, creating love and community and joy. And then you can imagine all the grief that lives in a hospice
mm-hmm.
office.
Mm-hmm.
So there was healing of that grief.
Yeah, and it brings ritual back, which is something else that we're really lacking.
Mm-hmm.
Just this morning, a friend posted on Facebook, why don't we tell people how much we love them and honor their lives until after they've died? And it got a lot of responses, and it made me think, Cari, of how you've posted that you've sort of created a living funeral through yourself by documenting your dying process online and getting immediate real-time feedback from the people whose lives you've touched and the people who love you. And it just seems like it's just such a more joyful way to say farewell.
Right. Well, we can interact and bear witness to the love.
Yeah.
As opposed to talking about it after the fact.
Yeah. It's different. Very different.
I think it stems from our fear of, we don't want to look messy. We don't want to get caught not looking good.
Mm-hmm.
Like dance like nobody's watching, love like you've never been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do it not messy means that it kind of equates to how we're trying to die, not messy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, under control.
Right.
Yeah.
Cari, one of your posts that really caught my attention was you've been honoring different people in your life. You honored Richard and your mother and stepfather and various other people and things. And then the fungal kingdom got its own post. And I just love that. And I would love to know your experiences with fungus, with mushrooms. You mentioned them and their role in mycoremediation and as food and as psychedelic companions on the journey of life. And I would love to hear more about that and if you've had psychedelic experiences that you think prepared you for this dying process.
Well, that's a big question, Amber.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I just want to say microbes, or, there's fungi, there's bacteria, there's virus. Microbes don't get the love they deserve. They're a huge part of why we all live.
Mm-hmm.
They make up most of what we all are. And there's wisdom in them. So I want to revere source. I consider them my elders.
Mm-hmm.
I want to honor and revere that source of wisdom and experience. And heed what guidance it has to share. And in doing so, I partake, consume. We all do. We need to do it to live. And each and every one of those families of microbes. You got to talk. I'm out of breath.
Well, as Cari was speaking, one thing I was thinking of is that they are life forms, one of the few life forms that can remediate toxins. They they have this signature quality of being able to take poison and turn it back into the stuff of life.
Mm-hmm.
Who else does that?
Mm-hmm.
And that mindset, that blueprint, that way of thinking is the blueprint that comes through psychedelic journeys influenced by those things.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a teaching in that. And I notice when I've been microdosing off mushrooms throughout this dying experience, when I'm in the state that they take me into, that's the state of mind I'm in. One of love, one of healing, one of seeing possibility.
For many people, when they're dying, they're in their, I'm just going to call it ego state.
Mm.
Their perspective, their point of view is very much from that, and that accounts for a lot of the experience of pain in the dying process. But as we perhaps are able to shift that perspective more to the spirit realm, then we have a different experience, and especially with pain, we're we're in the witness awareness state, and pain is not so first person.
Mm.
And that can happen, shifting into that more spirit-centered witness awareness state can happen. It doesn't have to be catalyzed by psychedelics, but they can certainly help.
Yes, and
medicine.
Go ahead, Cari.
I consider it medicine. Like you say, it doesn't have to happen. It's a medicine to lead with our soul consciousness. Our experience is one option, just like taking opiates is a medicine to disconnect from pain. We have choices, and the choice that the plant kingdom offers and the microbial kingdom offers appeals to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, one experience that so many people have with psychedelics and with mushrooms, and that I had at age 16, having no idea I was going to have this experience. It was my first time, and I was like, hey, I'm shrooming, didn't know that I would experience this like full on ego death, total mystical experience and awakening that really, it was scary for a few moments while it started, and I wasn't sure how to process it. But it soon became just ecstatic and full of awe. And I can't claim that it fully removed my fear of death, because it certainly still arises sometimes. But it really did fundamentally shift my experience of consciousness and of life. And I'm sure it was the first step on my journey towards being interested in death and really wanting to look at it and talk about it and work with it. And I know that so many people have the same experience, that a psychedelic experience can be like an ego death and can really teach us how to die and how to not be so afraid of the process.
Not be a victim.
Mm. And this is, of course, being looked at. This is being studied in universities now, as it was being in the 60s. They're giving psilocybin to terminal patients, and almost across the board, the percentage is incredibly high. It greatly reduces the terror and the fear that they are feeling about their impending death, and gives them a richness in the last few weeks and months, and makes them closer to their family members. So it's such an important medicine, and I'm so glad that it has this cultural resurgence happening right now. And I'm so glad to hear that you're microdosing, Cari. I think that's a wonderful idea. And I'm sure you guys know that Aldous Huxley had his wife inject him with LSD during the last few hours of his life, and so he went out like that. That's really interesting to me.
I think it helps me, both in what I've observed and what it's come up in my feelings, move from a why me attitude to why not. It's like moving from no to yes.
Mm.
It brings about such a glory, sacred viewpoint. I want to go into my death with my arms open and embracing the beauty of the experience that I am in. It's kind of like make love, not war. Make life loving, and it's a part of life.
Thank you for talking to me about that. It's an important conversation to have. Richard, you too are living through an experience that most of us are incredibly frightened of. what is happening for you right now as you watch your beloved life partner die?
How long is this show? um, what's happening for me? So, um, well, I'm blessed because I'm in the passenger seat getting a firsthand view of death and a firsthand view of love that is, the volume is really turned up because everything else is stripped away. You know, if Cari were really afraid of death, it would be a completely different story, but she's not. She's completely embracing it. So in her embracing of death and the dropping of that ego fear that we were just talking about around it, then guess what? All that's left is love. And so I'm sitting here in the passenger seat, and Cari driving the deathmobile here, is, you know, she's this radiant love being. She's, you know, she's goddess incarnate. And, you know, I get a front row seat for that. So that's one thing that's happening, and that's the predominant thing that's happening. And from, you know, from an ego perspective, you know, my heart's bleeding out. She's leaving. You know, and I feel like we're always connected, but I won't be able to touch her or talk to her in a normal way. So, you know, it's really complex how it is for me, you know, and those are just two examples, you know,
Mm-hmm.
being front row seat for this, you know, love turned on to full, and, you know, then being in grief. And I believe that grief is the emotional experience of or expression of love.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're different emotions. Um, you know, if the deeper the depth of love that we feel for something is directly relational to the amount of grief we're going to feel when it's gone. So I have no intention of getting over my grief. I'm going to go deeply into my grief, and not in a, you know, in our culture that's not necessarily seen as a healthy thing. And I'm not talking about locking myself in solitary confinement for years or anything, but to me, expressing the love happens through grief. I have no intention of throttling back on that.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
want to fully.
the the complexity of grief is so vast, and so many people, our culture doesn't understand it. And I know just what you speak of from my experience with my mother's sudden death in a car accident, which is that I was so devastated. Um, I still have a hard time believing that it's real and like wrapping my mind around it when I say those words. It's still like, oh yeah, that really happened. That's really my reality. She's really not here anymore. But at the same time, especially in those first few weeks, every cell in my being was so suffused with love, with her love and the love she had always given me and my sister and everyone else, that I was almost high. I was almost floating.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like you said, that the degree of grief is the same as the degree of love that was there. They're proportional to each other. It's like a direct ratio. And yeah, it's hard. It's so hard to put these big things into words, but you did it beautifully, Richard. Thank you.
It's excruciatingly blissful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, Cari, do you feel fear? Do you have moments of fear?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Good. I would think so. It's hard for me to imagine someone who is where you are not feeling fearful. It's such an unknown. It's the biggest unknown there is. How do you mediate that fear? What gets you through those moments?
Breath.
Mm.
Focus on my breathing. I remind myself that I am not my body, that I'm observing this. My goal, Ram Dass calls it the soul consciousness. My goal is to move into that watcher self. Because as I breathe myself back into the position of witness, I find myself detaching from fear. And it's a regular dance I have to do. And I seek love because I find that's a source of air that I need in those moments.
I was wanting to ask you about Ram Dass. You mentioned that you had met him in one of your posts, and well, I was wanting to ask about, I'm not really sure how I want to formulate this question, but clearly you have sought out spiritual teachings that have prepared you for this moment. Was that intentional? How did your path unfold in such a way that you found yourself in the presence of Ram Dass? And do you see a correlation between that seeking and the way you're able to approach death now?
I think there is a correlation, but I don't think there was a strategy because I saw the Ram Dass, Louise Hay, Wayne Dyer in my teens before I had the critical thinking to understand their motivations. I stumbled into their teachings. So in many ways, my slate was still blank enough to take on some really good work. And I don't think you ever unknow those things that you learn. So they were there when I was older and in the regular mill with all the rest of the folks, surrounded by fear and judgment and all those wonderful emotions. And I found just coming back to recognizing the true source of myself, that I found freedom and I found love. I found that bliss that I love so much. So I don't know how it created it. It found me. Maybe it was a soul contract, whatever. But it's been a great ride.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like it all comes back to love, Cari, and you are doing such a beautiful job of reminding those of us surrounding you of that. Um, is there anything else either of you would like to say?
Not me. I'm actually running short of the energy to add.
Yeah, I'm feeling like we are at an end. Richard?
I just feel blessed to be witness to Cari in her time.
I do want to add something.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we're talking about me, but you are really a catalyst here, Amber.
Mm-hmm.
Your desire to declare love in the way that you do and share what you share is so powerful and so helpful. It was you who gathered me in for your garden to grow. So I want to honor you for doing the work you're doing. And just acknowledge I'm just a cog in your wheel.
Thank you, Cari. There are few people that would mean as much to me coming from. I think it's wonderful that we all haven't spoken or seen each other in years, and we're able to have a conversation of this depth and honesty. And thank you both so much.
Thank you. Love me to you.
Yes, I love you guys. Cari died at home overlooking the ocean on November 19th at 9 to 9 p.m. under a new moon. Cari died as she had lived. This is a concept familiar to people who work with the dying, and it's an observation that's been made many, many times that people who have consciously faced death, who have lived their lives with kindness, with reverence, who have followed their curiosity, followed the calling of their soul and inner voice, die with a grace and a beauty. And on the other end, people who are angry, ego-driven, treat people unkindly, they tend to die excruciating deaths that are really hard for the people around them. And instead of blessing others with their death, they cause turmoil and heartache and despair. And so, and let this be a lesson to all of us who are still in the land of the living, that you'll die as you lived, more likely than not. I appreciate people like Cari so much who live consciously and live fully, and then can take that with them into their dying and touch the lives of so many. Today, my Facebook memories showed me something that Cari had posted on my wall 2 years ago in 2015. This was just a few weeks after my mom died. And she says, "Persevere, dear one. Death ends a life, not a relationship." And also today on Facebook, Richard posted that he had just found this entry in one of Cari's journals. "My purpose, to help people live their dying." She certainly did. And as she wished, Carrie's body was laid out in honor in their home overlooking the ocean. Friends stopped by and visited. I have a photo of it on my website. It's mythicmedicine.love/podcast. You can see it there. I want to talk a little bit about microdosing. If you're not familiar with this concept, it was invented and has been popularized by Jim Fadiman. I think his website is probably jamesfadiman.com if that's not right. Whatever his website is, I'll put it in the show notes for this episode. But he wrote a wonderful book called The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. I couldn't recommend it any more highly. He's a friend of mine and he has already agreed to be on the podcast. So in another month or two, that episode will be out and we'll talk more about microdosing, which is just this idea of taking really small amounts of a psychedelic subperceptual dose. So that means that you do not notice the effects. You don't notice that you have taken this substance, but what happens is that your day tends to go better. Your senses are heightened, maybe get more into the flow, more synchronicities occur. And this idea has really taken off. I hear about it all the time from people. And so I'm really looking forward to having Jim on the podcast. And I was just thrilled to hear that Cari was microdosing as she was dying. I love this idea. There's a whole lot of research being done now using psychedelics to help people at the end of their lives to let go of fear, to let go of the terror that we all have surrounding death, and to help them make peace. And I mean, across the board, the results are phenomenal. It's such a exciting area of study. I'm so glad that we are moving towards this direction in this culture. I wish we were already fully there, right? That these substances were totally legal and that people were using them correctly, which is really what Jim's book is all about, like how to use them to have safe, sacred, therapeutic journeys. They're not party drugs, as all of these studies show and as Cari's experience shows. So thank you so much for listening. To all my usual listeners who are just here for the herbalism and the more lighthearted conversations, thank you so much for listening to this. And to the people in Cari and Richard's realm who are here for the first time, thank you so much. And to Richard and to Cari, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your lives have touched so many people, and I am honored to be a part of Cari's vision of bringing the lessons from her life and her death to a larger audience. So, thank you. Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, handmade herbal medicines, and a lot more at mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, be sure to click the black banner across the top of the page to take my quiz, Which Magical Herb is Your Spirit Plant? It's a fun and lighthearted quiz, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with the medicine that you're in need of. If you love the show, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/medicine stories. There's some cool rewards there, like exclusive content, free access to my herbal ebook and online course, and the ability to chat with me. I am a crazy, busy, and overwhelmed mom, and adding another project into my life with this podcast is a questionable move. But I'm also so excited about it and just praying that the Patreon will allow me the financial wiggle room to keep doing it. Another way that you can support, if that's not an option, is to head over to iTunes and subscribe and review the podcast. That would be super helpful. Thank you. And thank you to Marie Sue for providing the music that I use. That's Marie with 2 E's, Sioux. This is from her song Wild Eyes, one of my favorites. Check out Marie Sue. Beautiful music. Thank you, and I look forward to next time. Bye.